Welcome to the Gibraltar Business Podcast. I'm your host, David Revagliatte. This is a show that goes beyond the surface of Gibraltar's business community by meeting the people who keep our economy going. It is brought to you by the Gibraltar Federation of Small Businesses and is sponsored by Gibraltar International Bank, a bank that shares our passion for business. It is brought to you by Motion, and in a collaboration with Barton Solutions is now something that you can watch, which I'm super excited about and quite nervous about, but also listen to via your favorite streaming service. Now on to today's episode. Welcome to this special episode of the Gibraltar Business Podcast, which is partnered with an event that the GFSB held recently called the Brexit Town Hall. In this episode, we're going to hear from 4 different experts, bringing 4 different standpoints from their relative sectors. We have someone from media, property, import, export, and also the legal profession. So I really hope you enjoy the discussions. So Lloyd, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
A real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, David.
Have you been on a podcast before, or?
Well, is there a difference I'm sure there is, between a podcast and a webcast? No, they're the same kind of thing.
Well, okay,
showing my age.
Yeah, maybe similar genre, but enough to say that we've all, I guess we've all been on them, right? Then Zoom calls.
That's true. My first podcast. Yeah, my first.
So Lloyd, you are joining us as part of, or just before, you're going to be joining the panel at the Brexit Town Hall, which is organised by the GFSB. So thanks for making time of your busy schedule to meet with us today. I've got some quick-fire questions for you based on your, not quick-fire as such, but not too many questions, and hopefully we'll get to some of the depth as part of the discussion you're going to have on the Town Hall. But from your viewpoint as a legal professional, okay, so where we are with the negotiations. As you know, the negotiations have been ongoing. From a legal perspective, what are the biggest challenges that Gibraltar faces in these negotiations?
Gosh, I mean, there's a number of them, but very clearly trying to square the circle of being operationally in Schengen but not part of it is huge, right? I mean, there are lots of technical issues, quite aside from any political issues, and there are plenty of political issues, and that clearly is the separate discussion, which is where all the big topics are evident, you know, on who's going to be where, if they're going to be anywhere, in terms of, you know, guards and immigration people and all the rest of it. But yeah, I mean, within Schengen, there are any number of issues that arise from that, just the whole, I don't want to call it freedom of movement, because it's not really quite that I think we've ever been aiming for as a jurisdiction. It's not possible. We're not in the EU, and we're not going to be in the EU. So it's really fluidity at the border, which this being in Schengen operationally might allow. But you know, it sounds simple in a way, but there are just so many sub-issues that are attached to that, from extradition to other immigration issues. It's a real web.
Of course, and even by that answer and trying to simplify it down, you can just tell that there's a lot of legal nuances that we may not be aware of.
Yes, and I have not been involved for a couple of years, and even when I was, it was purely on the technical stuff, the technical negotiations. But yeah, it's very difficult, I think, to separate the technical from the political in this particular context. No, in GIB and being so small, and I think it's probably true more widely as well in terms of technical details, which seem in themselves to be innocuous, but in the context they're often political. But yes, I mean, there are, as you say, and as I suggested, a host of sub-issues, and we won't know all of them. Things will have moved on into micro detail, and that's really where a lot of the tough negotiating surely will be, and will continue till the end.
Do you think that's where we are then, in that kind of complex?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think the CM has indicated quite rightly, and it sounds right to me, that a lot of the technical issues, notwithstanding their political content, I think have been dealt with, a great many of them. But the ones that remain are the key technical, political issues, legal issues, which, although they're 1% in a sense, they're really 50%, if you see what I mean, because qualitatively they're so important that if you can't agree on them, well, then there's no point agreeing on anything in a sense. So those are crucial points, and that's where the heart of it all is.
Is it maybe you leave the harder part till the end, right?
Well, I mean, the good thing is they've been, talking to each other for a long time. I think it's probably right that they were going down a route of, feeling each other out, if I can put it that way. And then also we had the political agreement, the New Year's Eve agreement, which set the parameters. It was always going to be hard, and I don't think there's anything wrong with speaking to issues as you go along. Yes, but at some point, obviously, you need to broach the big issues, and at some point, I suppose it's crunch time, and you've got to deal with them definitively or not at all, or leave them for the time being. But
you mentioned the framework there, and the framework was signed 4 years ago. Do you think an agreement is possible?
Well, I'm sure it's possible. I'm an optimist. I think it is possible. And I think probably desirable, depending on the terms. I'm sure it's possible, but as always, it takes, we can use a lot of cliches here, it takes two to tango. Everyone has to put a bit of water in their wine. If you're going to have a deal where the sides are, I guess, relatively far apart on maybe a couple of fundamentals, or have been, I don't know how close they are now, maybe they're a lot closer. I mean, there are indications that they're quite close, but again, it's getting it over the line on the key, most sensitive issues. I mean, this is as workable as the most sensitive issue, right? So if you can't get over that issue or that cluster of very sensitive issues,
but there's a whole team and a lot of people trying to unwrangle the legalities from a political side and a legal side. Yeah. Coming into focus now on a lot of the members of the GFSB and their day-to-day, is there anything that realistically small businesses can do or prepare for from a legal standpoint? From a legal standpoint,
I think probably it's quite limited, to be honest with you. And I know I'm here as a lawyer with some background in this, but one thing that strikes me that may well be in the works and certainly would be reasonable to expect is some kind of impact assessment. That helps you prepare, right? So if, I know, for example, with in the case of the UK, when it negotiated free trade agreements, and our agreement is very special and very different, but there are trade elements, certainly on goods by the sounds of it. There would be a paper published saying, well, on these models, this is a likely impact for this or that sector, these kinds of businesses. So that would help businesses understand and prepare. And then once the deal was done, and I'm thinking of any number of the UK free trade agreements that it's concluded, then afterwards an impact assessment was done. So that was often dealing with the same issues, but now that you've actually done the deal, you can say, well, we know what's on the paper. Now we know exactly how we can measure or we have an even better chance of measuring it, better ways of measuring the impact and assessing who will be affected in particular ways, positively and negatively. Because often for any kind of deal like this, here or elsewhere, there will be some winners and some losers. That can happen. It's natural that it does happen. And then the question would be, well, is there some kind of compensatory mechanism, for example, or other ways, or transition period, which has been talked about certainly in terms of the immigration point, but possibly also in terms of easing our way into a new economic model, which in some ways it would be.
I think that brings me on to pretty much my last question. And I think, I said I'd go easy on you in terms of if a deal is possible and the negotiating parties get it past the line, as you mentioned. Yeah. What happens then? What does an agreement then look like legally?
Right, good question. And I think, again, the CM has spoken to this before the UK Parliament, but I think probably from what I read in statements that have been made by government, it's, there would be, from the government's point of view, and I'm not speaking for the government here, I'm not a government, obviously, but they can speak for themselves, but there wouldn't be a referendum unless it impinged on sovereignty, but the whole point is we're being assured that it won't, so therefore no need, unless it had some other implication, but it looks like that's out, but there would be a parliamentary debate and there would be a sort of a recommendation to the UK. The UK has always been very clear that it wouldn't go ahead if it didn't have the backing of the Gibraltar government, and it seems the Gibraltar government would be looking for, to have a debate and by way of a motion indicating its support, and presumably would carry the day, even if, for example, some members of parliament didn't support it, but the government should be able to carry the day on that, I suppose. And it would indicate its assent, and then really all the formalities are between the UK and the EU, because this is, after all, a UK-EU treaty in which we feed in very significantly. It's all about us and at the end of the day. But yeah, there would be a series of legal mechanisms, but in a sense, locally there would be just, would be our parliament.
Because there is this time, because even that seems to, that will take its time as well, right? To
that will take its
an
time,
agreement.
but yes, we don't have what's, it would be unnecessary here anyway, because obviously we wouldn't be party to the agreement, but the UK has a thing called CRAG, which is an acronym to do with a constitutional scrutiny by Parliament of every international agreement. Here we haven't got that. We don't need that in the same way, but that doesn't mean there couldn't be scrutiny in the way that I've mentioned. So there could be, and I presume would be, a debate in Parliament, and then through some motion that is presented by the government, approval would be given, or an indication of approval of the treaty would be given. But yeah, it's a less formal process of scrutiny here.
Yeah. Of course, because a lot of the things agreed might impact our members' day-to-day operations as well. So.
Yes, and again, it'll be interesting to see there, for example, whether, as I'm sure will be the case, if and when a treaty is signed, there's the treaties, there's what's on the pages of the treaty itself, the text itself. But then typically certain provisions, not all provisions, without getting too legal and boring, but about this, but certain provisions will likely need to be implemented in local law. And so, of course, being faithful to the agreement will be important. And so, we can expect to see laws emerge as a result of the treaty to implement it properly locally. And that obviously will be of interest to members, and they should certainly, as all citizens should be, will want to look at that and monitor it and make sure that it's what they think it ought to look like, that it's faithful to the treaty, in other words. And I'm sure others will be looking at it as well.
I think where we are right now, we're 4 years down the line in terms of since the agreement. If an agreement comes in, we're also looking at a time afterwards. So we're away from clarity. Is that fair?
Sorry, just to understand, you're saying in terms of clarity. I mean,
where we are, I guess.
We are. I mean, we really are. We've got certainly indicators. Fluidity at the border, movement of goods, things peripheral to that, which again will be important in and of themselves. That may take on a life of their own, so it would be important to look at those. But again, it's very hard not to be trite or cliche, but the devil will be in the detail. Who could be against fluidity, and some fluidity or greater fluidity, or at least the fluidity we've had historically. At that minimal level, goods is probably a more problematic issue, and the question remains whether that is, we can turn that possible bug into a feature, right? I don't think it's something we've particularly been asking for, or maybe we have, I don't know, I'm not party to that, but it's something that's not obviously a benefit, but it might be a benefit, depending on how that's played and what the precise terms are. But in terms of comparative advantage, we don't export goods, so goods will be coming in that much more easily, which is in many ways a good thing, and it could benefit consumers, but it may not benefit businesses, or not all businesses. Some may well benefit. Again, to be positive about it, it'll mean the possibility of exporting goods into the EU, presumably, again depending on the detail, but presumably that would be reciprocal. So for the odd business who is thinking of that or wants to position itself that way,
it could be a good
opportunity. Yeah. Don't know what that was about.
Lloyd,
phone,
no, thank you so much for your
pleasure.
time. I won't keep you very much much longer because you're off to be part of the Brexit panel right now. But great to have you on the show.
David, great to have been here with you on my first podcast.
Yeah. Louis, thank you for joining me on the Gibraltar Business Podcast again.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me again.
I won't keep you long because I know that you are going to be part of the GFSB's Brexit Town Hall. But here we are discussing the agreement again, right? It's been 4 years since the initial agreement or framework agreement was signed. What's your take on negotiations so far?
I think classic negotiations, which are hugely important to the many parties that are involved. I think, I'm certainly involved in negotiations on a daily basis with respect to the work that I do in the business that I'm in. But of course, this is quite a substantial agreement that's been hopefully put out there. So I think I had every expectation from the very beginning, to a large degree, that it would take a while. And even at those stages where you think, or you feel potentially that there is something to be done and agreed, that the wire almost seems to be stretched right to its maximum. I think it's where and what that maximum is. I think we've had mootings over the past year, 2 years of a potential agreement. That's had its own impact in Gibraltar, in business sectors, certainly within the property sector as well. So in answer to your question, where are we? Look, your guess is as good as mine. My firm belief has always been that there has to be some agreement, whether it's an official one in the context of what we're hearing, what we're seeing, or whether it's just an extended or slightly different version. Gibraltar has to continue to function, as does the campo de libertad, as does politics generally. So I'm maybe not wholly negative, but of course it's a waiting game, and I think it's one of those classic situations of any major agreement. It's really taken to the wire. So I'm not wholly surprised by it, although slightly disappointed that we haven't had one.
I know how many times I think you and I have talked about possible kind of milestones as the whole of the business community.
Yeah.
Speaking from your standpoint, which is real estate and property here in Gibraltar, what specific outcomes would you consider essential to provide stability?
Good question, but I think the outcome is one where we can provide clients, the industry, the economy, any new comers to Gibraltar, new businesses, the ability of stability, of certainty, of providing a long-term approach to Gibraltar, as opposed to one where there is that uncertainty. Now, what's interesting there is that we've almost had uncertainty surrounding politics and business in Gibraltar for the past 30, 40, 50 years, 300 years. So it's not something that we're not used to. I think there is a slightly different dynamic here because of Brexit, obviously. But yeah, I mean, stability is crucial for any economy. We've managed to do very well given the circumstances that we've had for many, many years. I think the issue with this is that we potentially are close to something which is a real game changer for the long term, as opposed to the stability we've had for the past 30, 40 years, which hasn't been stability because we've had political issues in one way or another for many years, whether it's joint sovereignty, taxation, the agreement. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it. I mean, I mentioned to you in the last time we spoke that, for the part BMI and myself, I've been around for 28, 30 years working. You're almost worried every year as to what might happen politically, which may impact the economy and may impact your business, etc. So yeah, that's my view.
It's all of it, and I think, as you say, I think here in Gibraltar, and a lot of our listeners and owners of small businesses here will survive and thrive a lot of the time under the uncertainty, but it does feel like we're in a kind of fork in the road, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to hate the next couple of questions, but there's a lot of speculation as to what would happen if there was a deal versus a non-deal. Mm-hmm. What do you think would be the instant impact on the property market in a non-negotiated outcome?
Look, the logical answer is it won't be a positive. It won't have a positive impact. I was thinking about the panel today and the discussion we're going to have today, and I think invariably when you think things are going to be bad, they generally are never as bad as you think they might be. Likewise, when you think things are going to be really, really good, it may not be as good. So I'd like to be a little bit more pragmatic. I'm not going to be overly negative on the question of if there's no deal. I think if we look at Gibraltar historically, insofar as all the hurdles we've had historically, we have tended to have gone into hurdles and come out of them better than when we've gone into them. That's not to say that it's going to be the case again, but I think we've always had the ability to reinvent ourselves, to create new business, to create new ideas. Again, as I mentioned before, this is a bigger play on Gibraltar, but also big because there's that potential that we might get there. And I think most people's views, which I imagine is going to be your next question, on if there is a deal, is quite an exciting prospect. So going back to the first question, I am not wholly negative on there not being a deal. Of course it's concerning, and of course I think from a business perspective won't be good. I'll take you back to Brexit 2016. We thought that would be the end of the world, so to speak. Actually, things carried on because we knew there would be so long a period until there is certainty. Things did carry on. We had the politics of Theresa May, a weak parliament in the UK, then Boris Johnson, a bit of a stronger parliament, more direction, like him or not. Things really picked up and did really well under circumstances where there was huge uncertainty for us, and there continues to be that. COVID, that was meant to be the end of the world for us economically. Actually, we ended up having some of the best years economically, or certainly from a property perspective, that we've ever seen and had before. So I think there's all those positives to take into account from what may come as a negative, but no question, if there's no deal, it won't have a positive impact, certainly in the initial period, for Gibraltar. I think it's an obvious answer from that perspective.
Lastly, one of the last questions I had actually, and we'll keep this really short because I know you're off to be on the panel, is are you preparing for both scenarios? And can people prepare? Or?
It's difficult. Are we preparing for both scenarios? And we're just carrying, we've been pleasantly surprised over the past couple of years, certainly between 2019 to 2022, where, we had an astonishing couple of years insofar as sales, insofar as pricing. We saw prices go up between 50 and 100%. We've talked about this before. And actually, whether you may call it a preparation from middle of 2022, which is when we called, if you like, the peak of the market, it was inevitable for things to come to sort of settle down. It was unsustainable, I think, for the market to continue to grow at the pace it had grown. And since then, we've seen what I would rather call a realignment. That in itself might lead and has led to preparation for, where is the market today? Prices have come down by between 10 to 15%. What's interesting there is that downturn, or that realignment, isn't a wholesale realignment downwards. So that high end per square metre that we reached in 2022 of 10, 11, 12,000 pounds a square metre is still relevant today and applicable today, but actually only for frontline prime properties, as opposed to everything else has realigned itself. So I hope that sort of gives you a feeling for an answer on that one. Absolutely,
Louis, it's always so insightful to talk to you, and I think we're probably going to be talking about this subject much more in the future as well. So thank you for joining us on this Brexit special.
Thank you.
So Brian, welcome to the Gibraltar Business Podcast. It's an honour to have you on the show. Today's episode is a special one because what we're doing is we are getting 4 different viewpoints on what is a topic that is touching the whole of the community, business or otherwise, right? So the fact that you are here to share your views is amazing because you sometimes have that kind of wider view, right? Mm-hmm. As the editor of the Gibraltar Chronicle, few people have written about this, I'm sure, as much as you have. What's your view in negotiations so far?
I feel like I've been writing the same story since 2016, or different versions of it. It's a roller coaster, if I'm honest with you. There are days and there are periods where it looks like we're almost there. then it looks like we're slipping back, then it looks like we're almost there again, then it looks like we're slipping back. We've had that at several key points this year, between April and September, with the three four-way meetings in Brussels, the two foreign secretaries, UK and Spain, the Commission and the government of Gibraltar. The first one, it seemed like there was going to be a big announcement. There actually was a very significant announcement there. Agreement on general political principles for the airport, mobility and goods. The second one felt like it was going to be a big one, and then after 8 hours of negotiation, there was a holding statement again. The third one, again, a holding statement, progress. So where are the negotiations now? I'm still optimistic, I've got to be honest, and I'm more optimistic today than I was perhaps 2 months ago. And the reason that I say that primarily is because they're all still at the table and they're all still saying the same thing. And you don't put two foreign secretaries of two countries like the UK and Spain, a vice president of the European Commission, in a room 3 times in a row with the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, not to diminish his importance at that meeting, but we're talking about the foreign secretaries of countries with very big issues to deal with. We're talking about Vice President of the Commission with very big issues to deal with. You don't put people at that level in a room if you don't think you can get there. They still haven't got there, but they're still saying they want to get there, and they're still at the table. So I think that there is room for optimism despite the tendency to be negative.
I think the tendency to be negative, and again, I think it's en el clavo, no? There's a lot of, is it going to happen? This is now it's going to happen, then there's a different deadline or something that's actually coming up. With so many statements and events that get us so close, are there any specific events that suggest a resolution is near?
Specific events other than what I've just run through. I mean, those 3 meetings were pretty important. They hadn't happened before. They were pretty unique. I wouldn't be able to say that there is a specific thing that I would hang it on, other than the general sense of they're still at the table, they're still negotiating. Obviously, the conversations that we have in the background, I sense optimism. I sense that they feel that they can get there. But the problem with this is that, and in fact, I mean, this isn't my line. The Chief Minister has said this many times, as have other people in the negotiation. They open one door when they've resolved something really complex, and they suddenly realise that it unlocks or rather it presents another 20 doors that they need to get through. So it's really difficult. What they're trying to do is marry Gibraltar's legal system with the EU's legal system without undermining the EU frameworks, without undermining our frameworks, without overstepping red lines on issues like sovereignty, and we know how emotive that issue and how important it is on all sides. And they're trying to do that while we're outside the EU, and it's very difficult, whether we like it or whether we don't. The flip side of all of that is that obviously the uncertainty is not good. You know? And I hear a lot of people saying, well, look, I'd rather have a no deal than this uncertainty. I'm not of that school. I'd rather have the uncertainty than a no deal.
And I think actually, it's good that you guys, or everyone who's on this episode, are going to be a part of the panel, and there's a huge discussion to be had. I think the fact we had Lloyd on earlier on the show, he's talking about marrying what is a political negotiation and a legal framework as well. And the Chief Minister's also been on the show a couple of years ago, and he was saying how complex it was. So,
well, I mean, if I can stop you there, in the second four-way meeting in Brussels, after the meeting finished, Maros Sefcovic, who's the chief negotiator for the European Commission, was talking about not just the political will and the political leadership to get over these thorny issues of sovereignty and so on, but it has to be something that works and is implementable at a technical level. Because it has to work for all the 27, not just for Spain. It has to work for all the 27 members. And that's pretty complex.
Of course, and I think even if there was an agreement, I think that there's going to be a huge fallout or a lot of work or a big timeline for any implementation, I guess, as well. No? Also, just adding, outside of negotiation, the world seems to be going through a kind of a lot of turmoil. In your view, and as someone who's read up on everything that's happening across the world outside of GIB as well, what are the specific global events or pressures that may be impacting a timeline?
Ukraine, the same people who are doing this at the in the Spanish government, for example, at the top level, in the Commission, in the UK government, are the same ones who are dealing with Ukraine. So they have lots of other things on their agenda. With the change, with the elections in Spain, in the Commission in the UK, for example, electoral cycles, that's taken a lot of time away. The change of government in the UK, the change of TAC in its relationship with the EU, again, another change in the dynamic. I think helpful, frankly, but so there's all of these other pressures that are pulling at these people and have an impact, whether we like it or not, if nothing else in terms of bandwidth.
Of course, and when you see it like that, when you hear it like that, it's hard to stay optimistic, but you still are, right?
I'm still optimistic, yeah, I am. Because again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, these are top-level politicians in modern leading countries in Europe, both within the European Union and in Europe and in the world. They're not going to be sitting there and saying the same thing again and again and again if they genuinely didn't think they were going to there was a chance of getting there. We may not get there, but they certainly. My sense is that they certainly think that there's a chance that they can do this deal, and my sense is they're edging closer all the time, to be honest.
Well, let's keep that spirit of optimism and on the talks themselves. Brian, I won't keep you any longer. Thank you again, and you're welcome back on the show anytime.
Thank you very much.
So, Jimmy, thank you for joining us on the Gibraltar Business Podcast. I won't keep you very long, as I know this is your first podcast, no?
Absolutely. I don't even know how to spell it, but anyway. And I've never seen one myself. I don't know how to access it, but anyway.
Well, you haven't seen one yet, so you might be watching this one back once it's out.
I might even get hooked on it now.
Yes, I hope. And remember, you've got to subscribe. Jimmy, I won't keep you long because I know you are joining the other panelists who have also featured on the show today. And what we're trying to do is get 4 very different takes on what are very ongoing negotiations and very complex negotiations for Brexit. As a business owner and as someone who's been in business for a number of years, how does the uncertainty affect your supply chain and materials and labour with crossing the border?
Well, it will. The thing is that the uncertainty is so great that we haven't got a clue what's going to happen. So, I mean, we're pretty much panicking here in Gibraltar, at least some people are, and thinking or believing, and it might be the case, that should a no deal be put in effect, that we're basically having our borders closed and shut. Now, I'm probably older, or no, definitely older than you lot here, and probably older than a whole lot of people who will be today in the discussion. And I remember the days before, Franco days actually, before the border closed, in fact, and before we were in the EEC or the EU. And we regularly went to Spain. My dad remember taking us to the countryside, to Almoraima, to the beach in Bullos Beach. So access was there, and I don't think we're going to lose that access. What is probable, but then again, we haven't got a clue, unfortunately, is that access will be maybe more difficult or more restricted. In which case, it might be a situation whereby our workers will have to get up a little bit earlier. I mean, I'm simplifying things perhaps.
Yeah.
Obviously, the volume and the amount of people who are coming into GIB and using the frontier has nothing to do with what was happening in 1969 or 1960s, which is when I was talking to you about. But I think we mustn't necessarily panic yet either. So basically, I don't know whether I'm answering your question.
I think you are, and I think what I'm trying to get at is the uncertainty side, right? We had Louis Montegriffo earlier, he sat where you are right now, talking about uncertainty, and actually as a business community in GIB, we seem to be operating under uncertainty most of the time. Do you see that as well?
The uncertainty is definitely a killer. I mean, you don't want to invest, you don't want to expand, so it's definitely a killer, and this uncertainty which has been going on for I don't know how long now, maybe 2 or 3 years, is definitely not good. So I mean, ironically, a negative solution is better than this. Well, not really, but I mean, at least we can plan ahead, plan, forecast, invest or not invest, move out if necessary. But this uncertainty is definitely a killer.
So it's more what we need is clarity, right?
Absolutely.
What would be your, looking at if a deal was signed, how would that play out in your business, do you think?
Well, what deal? I mean, and what does it contain? I mean, we're talking about possible VAT and customs union being implemented, so we haven't got a clue. That's why we're all so anxious. So I can't reply to that. I mean, I can tell you what's happening currently in my business and in my sector.
Yeah, please do.
And it's that there appears to be very little policing in Gibraltar with regards to our counterparts in Spain, the Spanish retailers, who are freely coming into Gib to operate. When I say we, is the retail sector, which we recently have got together, which is interesting because we've never been a unified entity, and it appears that we're all suffering from the same problem. I mean, our sales have gone right down. You would have thought that in the advent of all these buildings that are going up, the Hassan Centenary, that it would be a boom period for us, whereas it's the opposite. It's really, really slow. And it's a massive amount of Spanish retailers are being allowed to operate here in Gib. Selling and retailing is fine, competition is fine. It's all part of business. But they're actually service providing here in Gib by delivering, by fitting, by laying, and that is very much unpoliced.
So for the benefit of some listeners who may not know your business, you're in the furniture supply, kitchen fitting trade,
Correct,
right?
Yeah, that's beds, mattresses, and so on.
So of course the competition, you feel you're getting competition from cross-border.
Massive, and it's been allowed, and we reckon, and we're starting to be suspicious of the fact that it's been allowed in order to, because sensitivities are high now, and the EU deal negotiations are going on. We believe that this is being allowed to happen for the greater good, if you know what I'm saying. And the current situation is causing damage right now to my sector, and it's quite a large sector.
So what would you feel? What would you and your fellow sector? What would you feel would need to be done?
Well, either police adequately, the same as the Guardia Civil police our activities. If we were to go to Spain, rightly so, they're doing their job. So it should be policed adequately by customs, by labour inspectors, by the Office of Fair Trading. And these people, these retailers, should register, should insure the workers, should do things legally and contribute to our economy, which we currently do, and they don't. So in effect, they're just pretty much taking the money out with no hindrance whatsoever. And it's causing a lot of damage, I tell you.
When you're at the panel, I know that this is going to be a feeling that has been voiced before, and I know that the OFT is running a campaign to discourage or to look at cross-border businesses. Are they doing enough in your view?
Absolutely not. And one of the things we had a meeting with the Office of Fair Trading about a month ago. A lot of empathy received from the new director, John Paul Fire, but the first thing we were told is that there's lack of resources, and they've got a lot of things to tackle, but lacking in resources. Same goes with labour inspectors, same goes if you want information from Statistics Office, lack of resources, they don't have statistics available, maybe contact agent customs, and it's pretty much difficult to move on, yeah.
I think, Jimmy, when playing devil's advocate, looking on the other side, when I've just had Brian Reyes here as well, he's been talking about a very complex negotiation that's taking a long time, but there's a lot to try and achieve. And I think, obviously, I think for businesses here, we're getting frustrated, and as time ticks on. Are you feeling optimistic now for an agreement?
I don't feel anything,
right?
Because you get people telling you that it's imminent, kissing distance. You've heard that before, within kissing distance, and others saying that there's no way. So I haven't got a clue. I mean, I wish I knew, and I wish if anybody knows that to come out and say what's happening. Because I mean, I don't know what the reaction from your other interviewees has been, but I'm not much the wiser as I was 2 years ago.
I think this is it. I think communication comes out, the statements coming out, and I think it will be a really strong discussion at the Boyd's later on.
What we need basically is a decision. And I know it's complex, and I know there's a lot of tira y jala, and we've got to be patient, but if we are required to be patient, at least try and help us out. I mean, at least my sector. Reduce input duty, eliminate input duty, same as what happened in COVID, that helped us quite a bit. And police their activities. If we don't want to upset our Spanish counterparts, at least help us out. As I said, by removing or reducing input duties, or helping us out on rates, and allow us to be a little bit more competitive, and allow us to be able to pay our bills and our wages and our rents, basically.
Okay, well, those are things that hopefully they start to look at putting, if an agreement isn't close, if we are kissing distance, maybe look at measures to make this a bit more of a level playing field. No?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, let's hope that is one of the outcomes as well from...
Yeah.
Jimmy, thanks a lot for joining me on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.